we have the pleasure of having with us Sandeep Waslekar sir, who is heading the strategicforesight.com website, .com organization, which is a think tank body in promoting and bringing out issue on strategic issues. So welcome on behalf of the Oro University. You are one of the distinguished speaker on the distinguished speaker webinar series we are having, and it is a pleasure and privilege to have you with us in the university. Thank you so much for accepting a request. For the audience, I just want to let you know that Sandeep Waslekar sir is an internationally acclaimed thought leader on a global future, known for conceiving several pioneering policy concepts. He has combined scholarship with exceptional practical experience. He has advised governments and institutions of 65 countries on managing future challenges under the auspices of the Strategic Foresight Group, a think tank he founded in 2002. Sandeep read philosophy, politics, economics at St. John's College of Oxford University on the Oxford JCR Scholarship from 1981 to 1983. He was confirmed delegate honoris causa of Symbiosis International University by the President of India in 2011. He was elected as a senior research fellow of the Centre for the Resolution of Intractable Conflicts at Harris Manchester College of Oxford University in 2014. He has been engaged in parallel diplomatic exercises to find common ground in the times of crisis. He was involved in the secret diplomacy between India and Pakistan and water diplomacy between government leaders in the Middle East and Africa. On the one hand, he has negotiated with violent extremists in Kashmir and Palestine, and on the other hand, he has consulted with presidents and prime ministers of several countries. He was invited to address a historical session of the United Nations Security Council, the world's highest political body, in November 2016. He has also spoken at the committees of the House of Commons and the House of Lords, European Parliament, United Nations, Alliance of Civilizations, World Bank, World Economic Forum annual meeting at Davos, among other prestigious institutions. In 1990, Sandeep authored 3 books on governance, and this should be noted by everyone: The New World Order, The South Asian Drama, and the Dharmaraj, Path-Breaking Reforms for India's Governance. Since 2002, he has guided research and writing of almost 50 reports of the Strategic Foresight Group, Global Future, Peace and Conflict, and Water Security. In 2010, he authored a bestseller book in his native Marathi language, Eka Dishecha Shodh, on new directions for India's future, which has had 22 editions. It has been translated into other Indian languages, converted into a talking book, and been an inspiration for the formation of several society organizations. He wrote the longest running fortnightly column for 8 years in Sakal, the leading newspaper in Maharashtra state in India. He has been quoted, reviewed, interviewed in more than 3,000 newspaper articles and television programs in some 70 to 80 countries, including BBC World Television, CNN, The Economist, New York Times, The Guardian, Financial Times, Newsweek, and almost all mainstream newspapers in South Asia and the Middle East. Sir, it is a pleasure and privilege to have you with us at Oro University Distinguished Lecture Webinar Series. But before I hand over to you, we have a special person with us, Professor Rajan Velukar, who has consented to attend this webinar series. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Rohit. Namaskar, Shri Waslekar ji, and I must thank you for accepting on my recommendation to have a webinar on this issue. Let me just add one more sentence about Shri Waslekar ji. Is other than what Rohit has said, he is a very thorough gentleman and a human being I have seen in him. I really don't want to take much of your time than listening to him, as I am also eager to listen to him. So thank you very much, Sandeep Waslekar ji, for coming to share your thoughts with the audience. So I think over to you. You can start your lecture.
Yeah, thank you. I'll be here. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Is the setting okay? You can see me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, I can carry on. Yeah. Because
please.
we had some technical problems to begin with. So when do you think I should stop? Like you want to finish at 4, right? It's
4:10 now. 4:10 will be fine.
Okay, fine. So I'll take about half an hour and then we will have some time for interaction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Okay, it's a pleasure for me to be with Auro University. I, of course, followed the writings of Sri Aurobindo for many years. I read Life Divine when I was very young, and I refer to his ideal of human unity from time to time. So when Dr. Velukar said that with the Auro University, I enthusiastically accepted, and it's my pleasure to be with you at the university, which is founded on the philosophy and the teachings of Sri Aurobindo. Let's start with something that Sri Aurobindo had said. He was very keen on promoting world peace, and his long-term ideal was a world state. But he said that while that remains unachievable, in the interim period there should be a federation of states, a confederation of states, and there should be a good cooperation between states. Now, this is very pertinent to the current crisis which are going on due to coronavirus. These crises would have been mitigated had there been better cooperation between states right at the beginning. So the scientific problem itself is beyond our capacity, and that is why the virus is spreading. But at the same time, this problem has been compounded by lack of adequate cooperation between states. And so, in the context of this problem, Sri Aurobindo's teaching is more relevant than anything else. And his insistence on cooperation between the states, between the nations. Let me elaborate a little bit on what happened and how we missed the opportunities before we start looking at post-COVID, because one of the objectives the world should have after this crisis are over is really to foster cooperation, which has been taught by Sri Aurobindo, also by other great Indian thinkers like Mahatma Gandhi and Rabindranath Tagore, and that is something really needed in the post-COVID phase. And we should avoid making the mistakes, the kind of mistakes we made in the beginning. So, as we all know, this problem started in Wuhan, in China. On 25th of January, the American consulate in Wuhan was closed, and they transferred all the American diplomatic personnel and even some American citizens in Wuhan to San Francisco by a chartered flight. On 30th of January, the WHO announced COVID-19 as the global health emergency. So after the Americans decided to shift their consular staff from Wuhan, and especially after the WHO announced the global health emergency, the nations of the world should have been conferring together with each other on an urgent basis to see how to tackle this emergency and how to cooperate with each other. But there was absolutely no sign of that happening at all. The US, while it transferred its own personnel, could have easily advised other countries of the problem that they had seen, and on the basis of which they decided to close their consulate. And they should have started conferring with their friendly countries like the ones in Europe, in India, and other countries in Asia about the possible pandemic and possible solutions to that. Didn't happen. Global health emergency, 30th of January, there was no discussion at all on the 1st January or 2nd January at the political level. There must have been some discussions going on at the technical level, but there was nothing that was happening at the political level. If urgent political steps had been taken in coordination with each other to cooperation by countries, we wouldn't have had the severity of the problem that we are facing. Problem would have been there anyway, but at least we could have controlled the severity by taking some steps at the beginning of February. Not only that, from 14 to 16 February, the foreign ministers of all the major countries in the world were together in Munich. They spent 3 days together in Munich, 14 days after the global health emergency was announced. And still, they did not discuss with each other how to cooperate between the countries to solve this problem. So there was a ready opportunity. They did not have to convene a special meeting of the ministers. This was in fact an academic conference where all these foreign ministers were present, and they had enough time to discuss the possible repercussions of the coronavirus crisis and the possible solutions. But they wasted that opportunity. They didn't discuss it at all. There is no public record of their discussing anything, and if there is any private discussions which took place, there is no evidence of the results that came out of such private discussions. So we missed big opportunities, and lot of the countries started taking actions only in March, when WHO had already announced the emergency on 30th January. So when we look at the post-COVID world, I think one very important cardinal principle of the future should be to foster international cooperation. And this was the message of Sri Aurobindo, and this is really extremely relevant in building the new structures and new processes after the crisis are over. Even in Europe, they have a union, and the problem first struck Italy, but there wasn't adequate cooperation between Italy and the other countries of the European Union. So even though they have an organization there, it was lacking in both coordination and in cooperation. So really the most important issue that we must give attention to after the crisis are over is to how to build a cooperative world order, how to foster that cooperation again. And here I would compare the situation to SARS, which took place in 2003. In the case of SARS, the total number of deaths in the world were 800 or 900. So the total deaths were under 1,000, even though SARS lasted for 1 full year. So one of the reasons why they were able to control the deaths in the case of SARS in 2003 was that there was very good and very prompt cooperation between the countries to try to contain the virus. So you have a direct example of SARS which controlled the deaths below 1,000 in 1 year's time, and coronavirus which in 3 months' time has killed almost 200,000 people and infected more than 3 million people. Of course, the strain of SARS virus was different from the strain of coronavirus. So that difference is there. But even considering that, international cooperation played a major role. The positive news is that now in the current situation, even though the political leaders and the governments are not cooperating, and they have not cooperated, scientists from all the major countries are engaged in extremely intensive cooperation. Scientists from China, US, France, Italy, UK, they are involved in very intensive cooperation to find vaccine. Normally, academics, and there are many academics present in this meeting today, would know that when scientists and academics, they come out with any new invention, they want to publish a paper, they want a credit, they want to be acclaimed for their innovation and for their findings. But in this case, the scientists from all the countries are not at all being bothered about their personal credits, about their fame, and about their personal gain from the research that they are making. They are really focused on finding the vaccine as soon as possible. So WHO has set up a conference line, and scientists are using that conference line around the world to try to find, to try to foster their cooperation. So when clinical trials are being done, I think at least 200 trials have been done, probably on the animals. So I know human trials have to start. So every time they find something, say some scientists in the United States find something, or scientists in UK find something, they go on that conference line and they inform the scientists around the world. And so the scientists in other countries then take that research ahead. And this scientific adventure was initiated by the decoding of the virus genome code by China. And from there, the Americans took over, and now a hospital in China and a hospital in Boston and Pasteur Institute in Paris and Oxford University, Cambridge University, they are all really cooperating very beautifully. And they are also in touch with some institutions in India and China, not so much for research, but for mass production of vaccine as soon as the research is complete. Because it's not enough to find a vaccine or to develop a vaccine. It's very important that it is made available at a reasonable cost around the world. Otherwise, if it is just sitting in the laboratory, it is of no use. So, where politicians have failed in international cooperation, scientists have succeeded. And I saw the interview of an Italian scientist to New York Times, and he said very beautifully, he said the way our research is progressing, we don't think of my country and your country, my language and your language, my flag and your flag. We are only concerned about finding a solution to the problems of humankind. And that is the spirit with which scientists are moving. So, what happens after a COVID crisis are over will depend upon where we take our lessons from. Shall we take our lessons from the scientists who are cooperating, giving up their personal gains? Or should we take our lessons from the politicians and the government leaders who wasted a lot of time in just confronting with each other and passing on the blame to each other? That is the other thing, that the governments were involved, particularly China and the US, in passing on the blame rather than cooperating. So if we have an attitude that the scientists have shown, the path that scientists have shown, and the path that was actually outlined by Sri Aurobindo almost 100 years ago in the first draft of his book, The Ideal of Human Unity, if we have that attitude, then we will be prepared to respond to crisis in the future, because this is not a last crisis, humanitarian crisis that the world is facing. There will be crisis, and there will be pandemics, and there will be other crises than pandemics, crisis related to climate change, crisis related to radiation, crisis related to weapons. There will be crisis. So if there is a spirit of cooperation, we will be in a position to respond. If there is no spirit of cooperation, then we will not be in a position to respond. The second issue after the crisis are over is what kind of economic recovery we want. There have been consultations between ministers of environment of several countries by video and by telephone. And there is a lot of research and writing which is coming out of environmental experts who are saying that now that we are experiencing the recession and now that we are experiencing economic setback, we must charter our recovery path with consideration of the green economy and consideration of environment and ecology. We should not go back to the old game where we didn't care for environment, because that could then lead to a new kind of problem. So therefore, our recovery should be green recovery. Now, to what extent is that possible is a practical question, and that the governments of various countries will have to see. But again, here this is possible if the countries decide to cooperate. Because if only one country decides to reduce its emissions, and if other countries do not care, the emissions will travel from one country to another. The emissions, which are the particulates in the air, they don't require a passport or a visa. They can just go and cross boundaries and they can cause a damage anywhere else. So, if you want to think in terms of a green recovery or an environmental recovery, then we will have to again think in terms of international cooperation. So, we come back to the essential issue of international cooperation again. And that is very important. The third issue, which will be quite significant, is that the economic setback that has been forced on us by the circumstances, by coronavirus, is bound to lead to social discontent next year in many parts of the world. There are already signs in some parts of the world that social discontent is rising. There were demonstrations in many parts of the US, ironically supported by the President of the United States. There were riots, small riots in Paris, in north of Paris. So already there are signs of social discontent. But these have been limited because coronavirus is right now spreading and people are worried. But once we go ahead to the next phase and economic dislocations start having a personal impact on people, then we have a serious risk of social discontent. And lot of this could happen end of 2020 or in 2021. Because I think for the next 3 to 4 months, people will be quite focused on trying to solve the immediate health problem. But beyond that, the social discontent. And so what happens to the social discontent? How do we manage it? Are the politicians able to do some social engineering and find a solution? Or does the social discontent go out of hand? Does it create any kind of impact on the political processes? That will be a very significant question, and today we simply can't answer that question. But this will be an important question. If you can manage social discontent with wisdom and with maturity, it may be possible to move on. But if there is no maturity, if there is no wisdom in handling the social discontent, there could be a big risk of very unpredictable consequences. There could be riots, there could be dethroning of governments in democracies or even in other countries. There could be rise of what we call the strongman phenomena. The consequences will be very unpredictable. I mean, in addition to the social discontent, or one particular aspect of social discontent will relate to the availability of food, all kinds of food items, food grains, fruits, vegetables, processed foods. Because one thing that the economic dislocation forced by the COVID has done is that it is going to disrupt the supply chains. And these supply chains, the disruption of supply chains, we have to see to what extent the food supply chains are disrupted. If food distribution supply chains are disrupted, there will be serious problems in many countries in the world. I think that in India, this problem should not be a severe one. We have 75 to 80 million tons of food grains in our godowns, and that should be enough to feed the people. And as soon as the critical virus problem is over, I think mobility will be in place, and it should be possible to move the food from the godowns to the consumers. So I don't think that this could be a big problem in India. We never know, but it's not likely to be a problem in India. But in many parts of the world, this could be a severe problem, because the grain markets, like all other markets, are quite integrated. And if some countries do not receive adequate food because of the supply chain dislocations and disruptions, the prices for food grains will increase. And once the prices for food grains increase in the world market, everybody will be equally affected. Whether it is a person sitting in Santiago, Chile, or whether it is a person sitting in Manila, Philippines, everybody will be affected. So the social discontent will have one specific angle, and that of the availability of food, and it will depend upon how to manage the food supplies. So these are some of the practical issues. But if we now look at a period which is, say, 2 years down the line, we are now in April, May 2020, and if you look at a period from 2022, what could possibly happen? First of all, it will depend upon how fast we bring the problem in control. Because so far we are not found a vaccine. There is some hope. Announcements are being made by various research institutes that they are on the verge of developing the vaccine. But human trials have just started by Oxford University. Others, I don't know what is the current state of human trials, where they are. So we have a complete black hole in front of us to try to even guess when the problem will be over. There is a talk about lifting lockdown in India and in other countries sometime in the next few weeks. The Indian lockdown from 3rd May, they may start a process of gradual lifting, not everywhere in the country, but maybe in some parts of the country. And similarly, many countries in Europe, North America, they will start lifting the lockdown in sometime in May or June. But then everybody is worried about the second wave. That if they lift the lockdown and if you have a second wave, and the second wave always, in the case of every disease, turns out to be worse than the first wave. It's always like that. That's the experience. So if you have a horrible second wave, then we don't know. So overall, considering the first wave, second wave and everything, we don't know how long it is going to take to solve this problem. And that will depend upon how fast the vaccine is available and how fast it is distributed to the needy around the world. If we hope and if it happens that vaccine is available within next 7-8 months, and if somehow lockdown and other impact has had an impact on COVID-19, and if let's say the situation is manageable in 6 months' time from now, not in control, not resolved, but at least something that can be managed by governments and institutions, then it will still take another 1 year of disruptions for economic reasons and for social reasons. But if we further assume that the social disruptions and social discontent is managed, then I think that the world will slowly start going back to the normal economic activity from 2020. That is what would happen. So I don't really believe that the globalization is going to stick. I think globalization is going to be there. Globalization started about 2,500 years ago. So it's a very powerful force. In last 2,500 years, there have been many setbacks and many developments. And of course, 2,000 years ago, there wasn't even transportation and communication. And still the world trade was taking place. So if globalization has grown, despite all the challenges of last 2.5 millennia, it's not going to be disrupted by one pandemic. It will bounce back. There may be some small changes in supply chain or in specific formulations, but it will bounce back. So we can expect that globalization will continue from 2022 onwards after a disruption of 1.5 years. And I don't think there will be any kind of a radical change. And we could go back to normal. But this is the risk. Going back to normal is the problem. That going back to normal is not a good news. Because if we go back to normal and if we don't have cooperation and we have confrontation in the international political arena, if we don't plan our recovery with environmental considerations, so if we go back to normal without cooperation, without ecological equilibrium in mind, without adequate management of social control, social discontent, then we have a problem. That going back to normal will actually be a problem. Another aspect which could come up in the next few months, we don't know, but some authors and philosophers are very concerned about it. It's that social control might increase through apps, through technology, For example, in China, they have really used this pandemic to introduce certain new technologies which now monitor the citizens' movements every bit. I mean, China always had a control over their citizens, but they have really used this pandemic to tighten the control and make it complete, make it total. And there may be a risk that such control may be exercised in many other countries. This is a concern a lot of philosophers have. Now we have to see exactly what happens in the course of next 1 year. So, I would say that if we are looking at a period beyond Corona crisis or beyond COVID-19, primarily it would depend on when we find a vaccine and when we solve the problem medically. That is really the primary consideration. There is absolutely nothing overriding the medical truth. But if we assume that, going by the past few experiences, if we assume that this could be resolved within a year's time or within 6 or 7 months' time, then we are looking at going back to life as usual in another 2 years' time. And then, rather than asking the question how the world would be post-COVID, we should ask ourselves the question how the world should be post-COVID. So, how it would be will be determined by government policies, by elections. Very important elections are taking place in the world in the next 6 months. In November this year, there will be elections for the presidency of the United States, and whether President Trump gets re-elected or whether Joe Biden gets elected will have a big impact on many developments. We will have an election for the new leader of Germany. Angela Merkel has been a very stable leader, and we don't know who is going to replace her, so that could also have a big impact. So some of these developments will have. Fortunately, in India, we don't have any elections, so we will have a continuum for at least the next 2 years, 3 years. But in many other parts of the world, there will be elections. There will be market forces. There will be scientific and technological developments. So science, technology has a speed of its own, has a life of its own. Market forces have life of their own. Politics has life of its own, and all that will move at its own pace and its own direction. So therefore, I don't agree with those who think that there would be a very fundamental change in a couple of years' time. There would be major changes in the next, say, 18 months or 12 months or 12 to 24 months. But beyond that, no. But critically, what is going to happen, and I'll make my last point and stop there so we have some time for interaction, it's the question of values. After the COVID crisis are over and after we construct the new paradigm, if we are going to be governed by enmities, jealousies, if we are going to be governed by selfishness, we could have another crisis in 1 year's time or 2 years' time, and there will be no end. And who knows, maybe the next crisis would be much worse than this crisis. But if we question our values, and if we realize the mistakes we made and the opportunities we lost, like the one in Munich when all the foreign ministers were together for 3 days and 15 days of no action after the WHO announced a global health emergency, if we learn lessons from all that, and if we decide to be a little humble, if we accept humility, if we accept cooperation as our values, then we would be in a position to counter the next challenge or the next problem that humanity will face. Because humankind will always face challenges, there is no doubt about that. This is not the large crisis as a lot of people are treating it. This is one amongst the continuum of big and small crises. We unfortunately have a tunnel vision. We look at the screen. So we see what is there on the screen of a computer. We don't see what is in the CPU. So right now on the screen we see coronavirus, so we think that is the problem. But last 10 years, so many reports had come out that there could be serious pandemic. We never gave any attention to it because there was no problem on the screen. The most remarkable of this report was a report by a joint commission set up by the World Bank and the WHO. And this commission was chaired by Gro Harlem Brundtland, former Prime Minister of Norway. And in September 19, it came out with a public report which said that the world faced imminent risk of a respiratory pathogen causing a fast-moving pandemic. These are the words from the report. So the world faces an imminent risk of a fast-moving pandemic caused by a respiratory pathogen. So this is not too different from what we are facing now. And this was a public report which was issued in September 19. After that, in October, Bill Gates Foundation sponsored an exercise hosted by Johns Hopkins University in Washington DC, when the leaders of various industries and health sector were present, and they did a scenario planning, a simulation exercise, and they found that there could be a serious pandemic, and that pandemic would lead to economic setbacks, lockdowns, stopping of the airlines, and disruption of supply chains. So you have one report in September 19, you have another report in October 19, and we say that coronavirus is a surprise. In fact, you have a global health emergency announced by WHO in January, and you still say coronavirus is a surprise. So basically, we have to see whether we want to follow a tunnel vision and only focus on what is in front of us. Because last 10 to 15 years, we are just focused on the security issues. Just terrorism, that's it. You have one terrorist attack and you keep talking about terrorism. Now we have pandemic, so we'll keep talking about pandemics, and you might have some environmental disaster or some security disaster and you won't even know. So in the end, we have to see what kind of vision we want. Do we want this small tunnel vision focused on the screen, or do we want a vision which is broad and which is able to look in the city? And what kind of values we want? Do we want values which are guided by compassion, which are guided by understanding, which are guided by humanity, or do we want values which are guided by suspicion, which are guided by mistrust, and which are guided by complete lack of faith in humanity? That is the question. And that's the reason why I accepted to come to this university, because Sri Aurobindo always emphasized the importance of human unity and the importance of consideration of the entire humankind, and not just our parochialism in shaping our life and shaping our world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your views. You have very beautifully laid out what should be the common goal between the different economies, and what are the various measures which the government of different world economies have to think about the economic recovery. There will be a kind of focus upon economic setbacks, which should be based on environment and social concerns, disruption in the food and the supply chain process. Problems will be there, and as you discussed in your talk, it may go till 2021. And in order to overcome this, we have to forget about the basic business profits and other objectives. Rather, economy should focus upon the values. Just for your information, our university also focuses upon certain values. For example, goodness, humility, peace, progress. They are the value which we try to help the student understand into the process of teaching and learning. But before I take on the question, I would pass on to Professor Velukar if he has any observations.
Thank you. No, I don't have any observation, but I must thank Shri Sandeep Waslekar for bringing out this issue of cooperation. I always used to talk in my speeches, rather than competing, we must cooperate with each other since last so many years. Because and this is this is an opportunity for all of us, as you have said, to come together and cooperate with each other, so that humanity as a whole will survive. it is not a question of the competition, but it is a question of our survival of humanity. And wonderfully you have put it, that how we have not really focused on what we should have been, the entire world, but how we have ignored the basic issues which we should have looked at. So thank you for putting it very comprehensively and very briefly. I am sure the Oro University should invite you for a very big discussion wherein people from different fields can come and then discuss about what really can be the strategy to overcome these issues. Thank you very much. I think you have many questions from the audience.
Yeah. So the very first question which came out is, you in your talk said American consulate was closed in Wuhan in the January around 15-16. Why they have not stopped the international flight till there, in the mid-March? So that is the first question which is coming from the audience. I'm repeating again. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, we can hear you. Yeah, please.
No, but I couldn't hear you properly. Can you repeat what you said?
I'm repeating again. In one of the participants asked a question that when American consulate was closed in the mid of January in Wuhan, why they took so much time to cancel their international flight till 16th of March. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I have no idea what the Americans were thinking. It's a question I am raising.
Yeah.
That normally speaking, when you face a serious humanitarian crisis, and to the extent that you close your consulate completely, you arrange an emergency flight to fly from Wuhan to San Francisco, you should inform your friendly countries. That's the normal diplomacy. It's not a legal obligation, but it's just the way diplomacy works, that you should inform your country. And I don't believe the Americans came to know about it only on the 24th of March, one day before they decided to vacate the consulate, close the consulate. I'm sure the CIA and the intelligence agencies would have been aware of it for several weeks before. So they obviously knew for weeks before. And there is always a practice of intelligence gathering between all the intelligence agencies and sharing intelligence on matters like this. So they should have shared. Now, why they didn't share, and why they didn't act, and why nobody else also acted after the WHO Director General announced the global health emergency on 30th of January? These are the questions I have really no answer to. I mean, this is what really I'm wondering. And on the top of that, I'm only repeating what I said earlier, but I'm so shocked that on 14th to 16th March, they were sitting together. All the foreign ministers were sitting together in Munich. So if the Americans have some complaints about China, and if China has some complaints about the US on this whole coronavirus crisis and how it started, and they are accusing each other, they were sitting face to face, living in the same hotel in Munich for 3 days. And they were accompanied by their advisors, by their assistants. The US Secretary of State was accompanied by US Defense Secretary and senior Congress persons. The Chinese Foreign Minister was accompanied by senior people from the Chinese government. They were in the same hotel for 3 days and attending the same conference. They could have simply talked with each other. So I really don't understand. So that's why I said the COVID-19 shows a breakdown of health systems. Definitely. I didn't talk much about that because we know how hospitals have proved to be inadequate, how ventilators have proved to be inadequate, how equipment has proved to be inadequate in many countries. So there has been a breakdown of health systems, but there has been a complete breakdown of the system of international cooperation in that critical period of 15 days. And I have no answer to your colleague as to why it happened, why the Americans thought like that. This is a question that we must raise and try to find answers to. Not to blame the Americans, because I don't believe in blaming countries, but in order to learn lessons and to make sure that in future, as international community, we don't make these mistakes again.
Okay. Thank you, sir. The second question comes is, what do you think about the approach which the WHO and the United Nations have taken in this time of global health disaster? And a lot of countries and economies, they are questioning their preparedness and credibility in terms of funding to this and addressing to this global disaster. Do you think there is an immediate need for any kind of forum on this global scale apart from WHO and World Bank?
We are facing, I'm facing a problem with sound. If you can go slow and loud, I'll be able to hear you.
My second question is that the approach of WHO and United Nations.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, I can hear you.
Yeah. I can't hear you so well. So can you go ahead again? Go over again.
The approach of WHO and the United Nations in this time of global health disaster has been criticized by the world economies in terms of their preparedness and the funding process. Do you think, is there any immediate need for unbiased forum on this global scale?
Well, I think WHO has been criticized by some parts of the international community, particularly the US, and US has refused to continue funding or giving their contribution to WHO. But about a week or 2 weeks ago, or week ago, I think, there was a video conference of 25 foreign ministers, led by the foreign minister of Germany and France, and India also participated in this video conference. And this conference of 25 foreign ministers, so the foreign ministers of 25 countries, passed a resolution expressing faith in WHO and giving full support to WHO. So the US has raised questions about WHO, but you had recently this group of foreign ministers of 25 countries, including major countries like US, like France, Germany, India, and many other countries, who have actually expressed a strong faith and support in the work of WHO. I'm sure that no international organization is perfect. In times of crisis, there are always problems. And it's not so easy to be on the top of the crisis. But the WHO had announced the emergency on the 30th of January. Why didn't all the countries spoke to the WHO on the 1st of February, the day after, or 31st of January, and asked them to give an action plan? Did countries ask WHO to provide a blueprint on next day? Why didn't the countries go to WHO in September, when the joint committee of WHO and the World Bank indicated the possibility of a pandemic hitting the world? So it is easy to criticize WHO. You can create another forum, it will be the same situation, because if some countries are unhappy with it, you can create politics. It's easy to create politics everywhere. I think the basic problem is that in many countries, in the West particularly, they reduce their investment in health over the last 20 years. That is the problem. It was not a story of last 1 year or 2 years, but over the last 20-25 years. And so the investments in doctors, in public hospitals, in paramedical services, in nurses, all that was reduced. So when this crisis hit, they suddenly were exposed, like the king without a robe, that they suddenly find that they don't really have even enough hospitals or enough equipment to deal with the crisis. And that has really angered many countries, including the US, because they have been exposed. And everybody is trying to find a scapegoat they want to blame. And so they think that they can blame WHO, but this is not the time to get into a blame game with any countries or with any institutions. Right now, we are in the middle of the crisis. There is no vaccine. People have died. 3 million people have been infected. We don't know how many of them are going to die. We don't know how many more are going to be infected. We don't know how many more are going to die. I mean, this crisis are not just something one reads about in the newspapers. Just last week, I was involved in communication with an officer from the UN, nothing to do with health issues, in a totally different department. And that officer was supposed to give me certain input. And suddenly, that officer wrote to me that she could not provide that input because she got affected by COVID-19 and she was being hospitalized. So it is happening to people you know, people you are working with. I mean, till 3 days before, I was working with her on some matters, and suddenly she contracted. So it's not something I'm reading about in the newspapers. It's something that I'm experiencing with the people I have been working with. She's in New York, and she's in hospital, and I haven't heard from her after that, after she went into the hospital, of course. So this is a real human crisis, and at this stage I think the world must unite. All the countries of the world should work together. We have to work with whatever we have, WHO, UN, whatever we have. Once the crisis are over, we can assess whether these instruments are adequate or inadequate, and how to make them more effective or to replace them with other instruments. That is a question we can ask after the crisis are over. Right now, we can't do this at the cost of human lives.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, sir. The other question which is coming is, though you have already partially answered that,
thank you.
How could a crisis like this help the nation to prepare? Hello? Fine. The question is, which you have already partially answered, is if the crisis like this, which is coming up in the nations and the world across, how we can prepare, how this crisis can help us in preparing for the future. And this is particularly in relation to the migration of these laborers which is happening, and which is one of the reasons why this pandemic is increasing, or the number of patients are increasing. What are the better ways in which we can accommodate these crises and these issues? Any thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think the most important lesson in terms of preparation for future crisis is that we should not have a tunnel vision. We should see outside of what the current situation is, and we should look at the future. Our whole problem is we are so concentrated on what is happening at the moment that we don't want to look beyond. Yeah. If only we had known that there is a global health emergency which would cause this kind of disruptions, we would have prepared for this crisis in the first week of February. We would have arranged for these businesses to migrant laborers to go back slowly, and there wouldn't have been any problems. If we had listened to the WHO warning on global health emergency on 30th of January. Having said that, looking at the future, I think what we really need, it's in Singapore there is a very interesting practice. Every ministry in Singapore has a unit dealing with foresight, anticipation. So every week there are these people, they are constantly looking at what is going to happen in future and how it will affect Singapore, and what kind of steps that we should take to prevent, and what kind of step that we should take immediately after the crisis occur or immediately after something happens. And every ministry has this unit in Singapore to look at it from that ministry's point of view. And these units are mostly serviced by young scholars, but the minister concerned, the cabinet minister, must participate in the work of this unit. That is compulsory. And every week they have consultations and briefings to the minister. So they are well prepared. So the moment the crises are happening, they have already anticipated it 6 months ago or 8 months ago. So I think we really need to create this kind of foresighting units in our government, in different ministries, to try to see what could happen, even in the state government, because India is a big country, unlike Singapore or many countries in Europe also. So we need to have mechanisms at a very practical level to look into the future, to map the future crisis. Now we are just looking at COVID-19, but let's see what are the crises going to hit us in 2022 or 23 when we start recovery. Otherwise, we start the recovery and you have another crisis and you don't know how to manage them. And they could be little different. They could be environmental crisis. They could be arising out of global warming. They could be arising out of major air pollution causing all kinds of disruptions. So we have to have at the very practical level some kind of a forward planning system across the board, in the state governments, in the central governments, in other institutions. So that is one, and we need to have that visionary approach to look into the future. We had Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, who had that Vision 2020 India, when he was a scientist in 1995. He was talking about it. So he was one leader who could look 25 years ahead. And this is before he became president. This is when he was a chief scientific advisor in 95. That is when he came out with this idea of Vision 2020, and he created a task force on Vision 2020. Now that was a vision for opportunities. It was not vision for risk and threats. But we have had very few people, few leaders like Dr. Abdul Kalam, who look ahead. And I think that is a very significant need, to look ahead and then go to nuts and bolts to see how we can solve problems. That's our future. Now, as far as the current problems of migrant labor is concerned, obviously now you just have to do what you can. And I think government is trying to send them back. They are going to arrange some buses. I just read today after the 4th of May. I think right now you just have to give immediate response to whatever you can.
Okay. So the last question is, sir, there are already problems faced by the business people due to lockdown in terms of repayment of loan, payment of interest, shortage of working capital, and many more. In your opinion, what are the recommendations which we can give to government or RBI or to banks to bring out in terms of reviving the economy?
I'm not an expert in this subject, but I would say that Raghuram Rajan, former Reserve Bank governor, has made some statements right today.
Okay.
So maybe we should, even I have to read his statement yet. So today only he has come out with some ideas. So that is one. Secondly, I think Amartya Sen has also, sometime back he wrote an article, I think jointly with Raghuram Rajan, where they more focused on the question of migrant labor, their economic situation, and how to tackle that. But with regard to the business community, I think we have to talk to some really good experts like Raghuram Rajan is a good example. People who have managed central institutions and see what they can suggest. I mean, I don't really, you have to have great insights. I have not been a businessman nor a central banker. So it will be not very fair for me to start giving recommendations on a subject for which we have some really good experts available.
Okay. Thank you so much, sir. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and going for your observation and suggestions on the basis of this coronavirus, which is going through, especially in India and across the world. And you have very rightly said, this is the right time for us to think about the questions which everyone has to answer in terms of values. There should be a change in the new paradigm in the way we think and behave in the society and the community at large. And human integration and cooperation is going to be the key in the coming future. So these are the takeaway for us from your talk today. Thank you so much, sir. And we will definitely get in touch with you and have you at the All University very soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was a pleasure. I'm sorry for the technical problems at my end, but we managed what we managed, and that's what matters.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Velukar. आपण भेटूया मुंबईत कधी.
भेटूया आपण. होय. हे सगळं
ते संपल्यानंतर भेटूया आपण.
संपल्यानंतर भेटू. Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Bye.